Now her alternative friends are attacking me for not accepting her. It started on a Monday morning. A day already steeped in its own kind of dull dread, when the message appeared. The sender's name froze my breath for half a beat, a name I had trained myself to ignore for years. There it was, glowing at the top of my phone screen, unapologetic, arrogant, familiar. I stared at it longer than I should have, letting 1,000 images flood back all at once. Tears behind locked doors, laughter that always felt like manipulation, promises that ended up wrapped in lies, and that damn wedding ring she waved in my face when she said she'd found better. The message was short. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years between. Just one question. I didn't respond. By noon, she'd written again. More words this time. A storm of them. Desperation woven into casual sentences. She made it sound like we'd simply drifted apart. No mention of the way she left. No memory of how she threw my clothes into the yard while her new man waited in the car with the engine running. No trace of how she told her friends I was emotionally unstable, how she called me a parasite when I lost my job, or how she laughed with her perfect little clique while I was trying to rebuild the rubble of what she destroyed. I deleted the message. Then I blocked the number. But something in me had been opened. Not love, not nostalgia, something much colder. Something quieter and far more dangerous. That night, one of her friends messaged me. Not her, not directly, but someone from that same venomous circle. The girls who wore cruelty like perfume. The ones who called themselves queens while dancing on the pain of others. She said I was being cruel for not answering. She said she was hurting, and I should at least hear her out. I left that message on read. Within hours, another one messaged me. Then another. They rotated like clockwork. Guilt, shame, mockery, then rage. One even said I was proving I was never a man to begin with, that only cowards ignored a woman in pain. They didn't know, or pretended not to, how many nights I spent unraveling myself trying to be everything that woman wanted, only to be discarded like a broken tool when she found someone with a nicer smile and deeper pockets. By Tuesday, I started receiving phone calls from unknown numbers, silent at first, then breathing, then voices I hadn't heard in years pretending to care, pretending to be neutral. One of them even cried. Fake, dry sobs echoing through the line like a bad stage play. She said she was shattered, that he had cheated, that he had lied, that everything she had done to me was now being done to her. I hung up. I didn't say a word. But the silence didn't stop them. They took it as a challenge. By Wednesday, the messages turned venomous. They accused me of enjoying her pain, said I was vengeful, said I was pathetic, said I was proving why she left in the first place. One even threatened to tell others I was emotionally abusive, even though none of them had ever been there to see the bruises she left on my mind. Bruises far worse than fists could ever manage. The chaos spilled onto social media, subtle at first, cryptic posts, inside jokes.
Vague accusation.
I was the ex who couldn't grow up, the bitter man-child, the emotional burden. My name wasn't tagged, but everyone knew. Mutual friends messaged me, confused, curious. Some believed them, some didn't. It didn't matter. The court of whispers had already reached its verdict. And through it all, I said nothing, because silence was power. Silence was the fortress I had built from the wreckage she left behind. Every unanswered message was another brick. Every ignored insult was steel reinforcement. I didn't need to explain myself to people who watched her tear me down and laughed. I didn't need to justify my healing to those who mocked me while she danced on the ashes of what we used to be. But even fortresses can be tested. By Friday, a new post appeared, a photo of her. Eyes red, mascara smeared, fingers curled into fists, with a caption that accused me of abandoning a woman who needed help. It exploded. Dozens of comments, dozens of lies. She played the victim like it was an art form, and her followers, the same ones who cheered her on when she left me for her dream man, swallowed every drop like wine. They didn't know she'd already tried to come back. They didn't know the truth, that I had moved on, not with someone new, but with peace. That my nights were no longer haunted. That my home no longer echoed with slammed doors and silent treatments. That I could finally breathe. That same night, she created a new number to call me. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. The sound of her voice was surreal, shaky, unsure, desperate. She spoke of betrayal, of regret, of wanting to talk. But beneath the trembling tone was something else. Entitlement. She still thought she had a right to my time, my attention, my heart. She didn't know I had nothing left to give her. She had emptied me years ago and left without a second glance. Now she wanted to refill her soul with pieces of mine, as if I was a reservoir she could return to when her own well ran dry. Over the weekend, they escalated. Photos of us, old ones, began surfacing. Posts captioned with sweet little lies. Memories rewritten with her as the savior, me as the villain. People started messaging me, asking why I was being so heartless, why I wouldn't even talk to her, why I couldn't be the bigger person. No one asked what it took to survive her. No one asked about the nights I sat on the floor, wondering if I mattered. No one asked about the debt she left behind in my name. No one asked about the months I spent rebuilding my credit, my sanity, my life. Then Sunday came. A delivery arrived at my door. A box. Inside, a framed photo of us. One of the only ones I hadn't burned. One I had buried in a storage unit and forgotten. She must have kept a copy. Attached was a note, handwritten, with the same cursive loops I used to trace on her back. It read like a eulogy to a version of herself she wanted me to remember. It begged me to meet, just once. I set the frame face down. Then I lit the note on fire. The ashes curled and danced, and in that brief flame, I saw the truth. She hadn't changed. She had simply lost. Her perfect life had cracked, and now she wanted to crawl back to the one person who had always carried her when she stumbled. But I was no longer the man she left behind. I had scars now, armor, a spine forged in betrayal. She thought she could pull me back into her orbit. She didn't realize I had already burned the map. And this was just the beginning. The storm had not yet broken, but the air was thick with a tension that promised disaster. Every day felt like a countdown, every hour a step closer to the moment when the fragile balance I'd fought to achieve would shatter. After burning the note, after denying her any piece of my present or future, I thought I had closed that chapter. But they hadn't. They never truly let go. It started subtle, like the first whispers of wind before the tempest. The car waiting a little too long in the parking lot outside my apartment was the first sign. No plates, windows darkened, engine off. A shadow sitting patiently in the night. The flash of headlights as I passed. An attempt at intimidation or perhaps just a test. I didn't flinch. I never did. I walked on, silent and steady. A man who had learned to be invisible in a world that wanted to burn him ollie. The social attacks came next. My name was dragged through the mud again, though I kept my digital life scrubbed clean.
No Profiles, no Fotos, no Trace.
They tried to poison the well with rumors. Lies about how I was the cruel one. The villain who had destroyed her perfect little world. But the venom bounced off my armor. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, some confused, some skep. Late one night, a package arrived. No sender, no note. Just a small box that smelled faintly of her favorite perfume. The scent I had once bought her with trembling hands, thinking it might tether her to me. Inside was the empty bottle, broken glass threatening to cut as much as the memories it held. It was a message, a taunt, a reminder that even ghosts can hurt. I crushed the bottle underfoot and watched the shards scatter like fractured promises across the cold concrete. That's when it hit me. They weren't just going to haunt my past. They were coming for my present, my peace, my sanity. Calls started flooding in, unknown numbers, silent at first, then heavy breathing. then voices I recognized too well. The ones who once whispered poison in her ear were now weaponizing their loyalty, trying to break me with waves of deceit and manipulation. They told me she was shattered, betrayed by the man she called perfect, that he had cheated, lied, and shattered her world just as she had shattered mine. I didn't respond. Silence was my fortress. But silence alone couldn't shield me forever. Photos began to surface online. Old snapshots of us, moments stolen from happier days and twisted with captions that painted me as the monster. He abandoned me. He never cared. The cruel ex who left me broken. None of it true, but in the digital age, truth was just another casualty. I felt the weight of their judgment press down, but I refused to engage. My revenge wasn't in words or social media battles. It was in survival, in rising above the chaos they created. Then came the threat disguised as a plea. A note slipped under my door, begging for a meeting. Handwritten, a ghost of the past in cursive. I burned it without hesitation. Ashes whispered my answer. I was done being her crutch. But that night the dam broke. I awoke to the sound of shattering glass downstairs. My sanctuary violated. The front door cracked open, footsteps echoing in the dark. They had crossed the line. I grabbed the only weapon within reach, a heavy flashlight, and descended. Shadows moved in the corners. The smell of burnt perfume still lingered in the air. My heart pounded, adrenaline surged. I was no longer a man broken by love or lies. I was a man forged in fire, ready to fight for the peace I claimed. The intruders fled before I confronted them, leaving behind shattered remnants of my life and a clear message. They weren't finished. The next days blurred into a cycle of threats, paranoia, and vigilance. Every stranger on the street could be a spy, every call a trap. But the rage inside me sharpened my senses and hardened my resolve. They wanted me to crumble. I wanted them to regret ever turning their venom toward me. I began documenting everything, every message, every call, every shadow in the night. The quiet man was now the hunter, gathering evidence for the reckoning to come. She reached out again, this time through a mutual friend, the same circle of toxicity that had formed around her like a shield. They tried to use sympathy, manipulation, lies, but their words bounced off the walls I'd built with pain and experience. By the end of the week, the air was electric with anticipation. The final act was near. When it came, it was brutal and unexpected. A public post, dripping with fabricated tears and accusations, exploded on a platform where we both had mutual connections. She played the victim with masterful precision, painting me as cold and cruel. The floodgates opened. Messages poured in, some from old friends, some from strangers, each eager to condemn me or console her. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched the chaos with cold detachment, knowing the truth was mine alone. The war was no longer private. It had become a spectacle. But I had learned that in war, the most devastating weapon was patience. I waited, and when the time was right, I would strike back. Not with words, but with the truth they all wanted to ignore. The battlefield shifted as the noise around me grew deafening. The digital war waged relentlessly. Lies, rumors, manipulated memories, and slanderous whispers coursing through every corner of the network. Yet, I remained a ghost, untouchable and silent, watching my adversaries burn their own bridges in their frantic attempts to pull me back into their chaotic spiral. Their desperation was palpable. The same friends who once laughed alongside her now turned their venom towards me. The so-called perfect husband who had betrayed her emerged as their latest scapegoat, while I was cast as the heartless villain who never cared, the man who abandoned her in her time of need. They twisted facts with an artistry born of cruelty. But the truth, no matter how deeply buried beneath layers of deception, had a stubborn way of clawing its way to the surface. I knew that my time was coming. In the meantime, I kept my distance. Every message I ignored, every accusation I refused to answer, built a fortress of silence around me. My revenge would not come in the form of petty social media battles or angry confrontations. It would be surgical, precise, and devastating. I focused on rebuilding myself quietly and methodically. The scars she left ran deep, but I was no longer the broken man she discarded. I strengthened my mind and body, transformed my pain into power, and prepared to reclaim control over the chaos she unleashed. As I gathered evidence, I began to uncover the cracks in the facade she so carefully maintained. Behind the flawless images and rehearsed victimhood lurked a pattern of manipulation and betrayal far worse than anything I had endured. The perfect husband was not the angel she portrayed. He was a mirror reflecting the toxicity that had always surrounded her. I compiled every piece: text messages, photos, witness accounts, a dossier of deceit that exposed their lies and infidelities. Their empire of falsehoods began to crumble under the weight of truth, and I was ready to deliver the final blow. The moment came unexpectedly. A mutual acquaintance reached out with information that shattered their carefully crafted narrative. Proof of betrayals, secrets kept in the dark, and a web of lies spun to trap those who dared to question the story. With this ammunition, I struck back silently but effectively. Anonymous tips, leaked messages, subtle hints dropped where they would cause the most damage. I watched as alliances fractured and trust dissolved, the perfect image of her ideal life unraveling in real time. They tried to retaliate, but their blows were clumsy and desperate. The more they flailed, the deeper they sank into their own pit of ruin. I had become a force they underestimated, a ghost with a purpose, a shadow that refused to fade. And as the chaos consumed them, I stood firm, ready to reclaim what was stolen from me. The battle had moved far beyond messages and silent calls. It was a war of shadows and whispered secrets, played out in the hidden corners where trust had once lived. Every day, every hour, the tension thickened, the stakes grew higher, and the edges of my life began to fracture and reform in ways I had never imagined possible. I was no longer merely surviving. I was forging a weapon from the chaos, a blade honed sharp by betrayal and silence. The perfect illusion she had maintained, the flawless facade of the ideal husband, and the perfect life they built together was unraveling before my eyes. Evidence accumulated like fallen leaves after a storm. Texts hidden behind locked phones, meetings disguised as work trips, whispered rumors from those tired of lies. Slowly, the truth crept out from beneath the cracks in their carefully painted walls. I gathered it, piece by piece, like a predator stalking its prey, knowing every revelation was another strike in my silent war. The toxicity of her friends, those so-called queens who had wielded cruelty as a weapon against me, began to crack under pressure too. Their veiled threats and venomous messages, once so confident and aggressive, grew desperate and erratic. The more they tried to provoke me, the more they exposed their own vulnerabilities, their own lies. They did not know I was watching, waiting, cataloging every misstep, every overreach. My world was no longer confined to the boundaries of personal revenge. It had become a battlefield where loyalty was questioned and alliances dissolved. Mutual friends whispered, casting sideways glances, unsure where to stand, caught between the two storms. Some reached out in quiet support, others disappeared entirely, unwilling to risk their own reputations in the crossfire. It was isolation by design, a tactic I had learned early and embraced fully. But with isolation came clarity. I found strength not in the approval of others, but in the cold certainty of my own truth. The scars she left were not wounds but armor, forged in fire and unyielding as steel. Each day, as the world around me trembled and shifted, I built a new foundation, solid, impenetrable, and resolute. The man they tried to destroy was gone. In his place stood someone shaped by betrayal but unbroken. The turning point came unexpectedly, a leak. A trusted confidant from their inner circle, wearied by lies and tired of the deception, sent me a package. Inside were phone records, emails, photos, irrefutable proof that shattered the myth of her perfect marriage. Cheating, manipulation, threats concealed behind smiles and staged photos. Their ideal life was nothing more than a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Instead, I prepared. With patience as my weapon, I let the information simmer in the background, a slow-burning fuse that would ignite at the perfect moment. I knew timing was everything. Revenge was not a sprint but a marathon, measured in careful moves and calculated strikes. Meanwhile, the harassment continued. Messages flooded in, some venomous, others pleading. The lines blurred between friend and foe as old wounds were reopened and new ones inflicted. The digital battlefield became a minefield of emotional landmines, each explosion threatening to send me spiraling back into the abyss. But I remained unshaken, my resolve hardening with every attack. I started documenting everything meticulously, screenshots, timestamps, copies of messages and calls. This wasn't just personal. It was preparation for the reckoning. When the time came, I would not be the victim but the victor, wielding truth like a weapon sharp enough to cut through their lies and manipulations. As days turned to weeks, the pressure mounted. The perfect life they flaunted cracked under the weight of betrayal and exposure. Mutual friends began to question their loyalty, gossip shifted, and the carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. I watched quietly, knowing that the collapse was inevitable and that my silence was the most powerful weapon in my arsenal. Then came the breaking point. A public post appeared, crafted with calculated precision, dripping with fake tears and accusations designed to garner sympathy. She played the victim with masterful skill, painting me as cold and heartless, the source of her misery. The floodgates opened. Messages poured in from strangers and acquaintances alike, ready to judge and condemn without knowing the truth. But I said nothing, because I knew the truth didn't need to be shouted from rooftops. It needed to be revealed slowly, like a shadow creeping across the face of the sun, undeniable and unrelenting. The final act was near. I prepared my strike with care, anonymously sharing the evidence with key people, exposing the lies without becoming the villain. I let the truth seep into their world, watching as the foundations of their perfect life crumbled. The shock was palpable. The betrayals once hidden in darkness were dragged into the light, exposing the rot at the core. As their empire fell apart, the queen of cruelty was left exposed, stripped of her power and surrounded by the ruins of her own making. The friends who had once attacked me retreated, their loyalty shattered. The man she had claimed was perfect was revealed as another liar, another betrayer. And I stood in the ruins, victorious but changed. The man who had once been discarded was now the one holding the keys to the past, the present, and the future. My revenge was complete, not in destruction but in survival, not in screams, but in silence, not in fury, but in calm. This was no longer about her, or the friends who had attacked me. This was about me reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my peace. I had been tested, broken, and betrayed, and I had emerged stronger. The dust settled unevenly over the wreckage they left behind, but the silence I embraced was far from peaceful. It was a silence filled with the hum of anticipation, the steady ticking of time marking the moments before the next wave. Revenge is a tide that never truly recedes. It only gathers strength beneath the surface before it crashes again. And I was ready to ride that tide to its bitter end. The fallout from the exposures was brutal and swift. The perfect image she had cultivated collapsed like a house of cards, and with it, her grip on the circle of so-called friends dissolved into whispers and betrayals. Mutual acquaintances who had once eagerly taken sides began retreating into the shadows, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire of truths too ugly to ignore. Her so-called ideal husband's flawless mask shattered along with hers. Texts, calls, and secret meetings revealed a pattern of duplicity far worse than any facade had hinted. The man once seen as the innocent victim was exposed as a master of deception, weaving his own web of lies beneath her carefully crafted drama. But the victory was hollow. Even as the truth tore their world apart, I found myself navigating the wreckage, aware that the battlefield had shifted from anger and betrayal to a more complex war for control of narratives, reputations, and futures. The toxic friends, once so bold and vicious, turned inward, clawing at each other with venom sharper than any directed at me. Their online tirades descended into chaos as they tried to salvage what little remained of their fractured loyalty. Some begged for forgiveness, others pointed fingers in a desperate game of blame. I watched, detached, as their empires crumbled from within. Each post, each comment, each message was another thread unraveling the toxic tapestry they had woven around my life. They had underestimated my silence, my patience, my resolve. They had forgotten that survival was a kind of victory in itself. In the midst of this chaos, I focused on rebuilding the parts of myself that had been shattered. Nights once haunted by memories of betrayal gave way to quiet reflections. I rebuilt my home, piece by piece, reclaiming the spaces she had once filled with lies and hurt. I surrounded myself with new routines, new goals, new reasons to wake up and move forward. But the scars remained, etched deep beneath the surface, reminders of the war waged not just between two people but within myself. Trust had become a currency I no longer spent freely. Vulnerability was a luxury I could no longer afford. Then came the messages, not from her, but from others who had watched the destruction unfold. Some were curious, others cautious, many sympathetic. They offered pieces of their own stories, fragments of pain and survival that mirrored my own. In those connections, I found unexpected strength. The realization that I was not alone, that others had walked through fire and emerged on the other side, became a balm to the wounds still fresh. With this newfound perspective, I began to shift the narrative. Revenge was no longer about tearing down. It was about building up, not just for myself, but for anyone who had been broken and discarded by those they trusted. I reached out quietly, anonymously at first, to those caught in similar storms. I shared what I had learned about resilience, about reclaiming power, about moving beyond the pain. The connections grew, forming a web of support and understanding that stretched beyond the confines of my own story. Meanwhile, the chaos from the past continued to ripple outward. Legal threats surfaced, false accusations aimed at discrediting me, attempts to silence the truth. But I was prepared. The meticulous records I had kept became my shield and sword. Every lie was met with fact, every threat countered with evidence. The war had changed, but it was far from over. And in the quiet moments between the battles, I realized that my revenge had taken on a new form, not one of destruction, but of survival, strength, and silent triumph. I was no longer the broken man she had left behind. I was the one who stood tall amid the ruins, and I would not be broken again. The war had transformed. No longer was it a battle fought only with words, accusations, and shattered memories. It had grown into a contest of wills, a psychological siege that infiltrated every corner of my life. The battlefield was everywhere. In the quiet streets I walked, the calls I ignored, the emails I carefully archived. Their attempts to destabilize me had evolved from crude attacks into calculated maneuvers aimed at unraveling my very existence. But I was no longer vulnerable. The man who had once been shattered by betrayal had rebuilt himself from the ashes, forging a new identity tempered by resilience and hardened resolve. The scars remained, but they were no longer wounds. They were marks of survival and strength. The poison that once seeped from her lies now ricocheted harmlessly off the walls I had constructed around my life. Every attempt to drag me back into the chaos was met with silence or strategic countermeasures. I watched as their desperate schemes fell apart, their once cohesive front dissolving into infighting and paranoia. Legal battles surfaced, a maze of accusations and denials, each side wielding documentation like weapons. I had anticipated their moves, prepared for every twist and turn, my meticulous records providing the foundation for my defense. It was exhausting, relentless, but I refused to falter. The social fallout was no less brutal. Mutual acquaintances who had once reveled in gossip now tread lightly, aware that the narrative was shifting beneath their feet. The lines between friend and foe blurred, trust became scarce, and alliances dissolved in the wake of truth. In the midst of this storm, I found unexpected moments of clarity. The rage that had fueled my initial revenge cooled into a determined focus on rebuilding not just my life, but my sense of self. I sought out therapy, poured energy into my work and passions, and surrounded myself with people who valued honesty and loyalty. The toxic influence of her and her circle faded like a bad dream, replaced by new beginnings and quieter victories. But the lessons learned remained etched in my consciousness, a reminder of the cost of betrayal and the price of survival. Despite the progress, occasional shadows of the past still crept in. Unexpected encounters, fleeting reminders, moments when old wounds throbbed beneath the surface. But each time, I faced them with the strength I had forged in battle. I realized that revenge was no longer about retaliation. It was about reclaiming control, not over her or the lies, but over myself. And in that reclamation, I found a power far greater than any victory could provide. The end was never clean. Revenge rarely is. It's a slow bleed, a long unraveling, a battle fought in shadows as much as in light. After everything, the lies, the betrayals, the silent wars waged on every front, the final moments felt less like a climax and more like a settling dust, the quiet aftermath of a storm that had torn everything apart. By now, the chaos that once defined my life had morphed into a complex mosaic of broken trust, fractured relationships, and hard-earned clarity. The people who had surrounded her, toxic friends, enablers, and those caught in the web of deceit, were scattered, their power diminished and influence fractured. The man she called perfect was exposed for the manipulator he truly was, his carefully constructed image in ruins. And I stood apart, no longer the broken figure of the past, but a man forged in fire, tempered by pain, and strengthened by survival. But survival was just the beginning. The final act of my revenge was not destruction but reclamation. It was taking back everything she tried to steal, my dignity, my peace, my future. It was transforming the pain she caused into a foundation for a new life, one built on resilience, truth, and quiet strength. I began by severing the last ties that bound me to that toxic past. Legal battles reached their conclusion with clear victories, truth documented, lies exposed, and justice served not through vengeance but through clarity and facts. The courts became another battlefield where silence was my ally and preparation my weapon. Every accusation against me was dismantled with evidence, every attempt to manipulate the system neutralized by truth. Outside the courtroom, the war was subtler but no less fierce. Social circles that once whispered rumors now avoided me, wary of the man who had weathered the storm and come out stronger. The whispers turned to silence, the glances to avoidance. I didn't seek their approval anymore. I didn't need it. Instead, I focused inward. I rebuilt my life on my terms, forging new paths where the past could no longer reach me. I embraced solitude not as loneliness but as strength, a space to heal, grow, and rediscover myself. The scars remained, but they were badges of survival, marks of a man who had faced betrayal and refused to be broken. Connections formed slowly, cautiously. Trust, once shattered, was not given lightly, but earned through consistent honesty and respect. I surrounded myself with people who valued authenticity, who saw beyond the surface to the man beneath. Revenge had transformed into redemption, not of her, but of myself. And yet, the final piece of the puzzle was acceptance. I came to understand that true revenge was not about destruction or humiliation, but about reclaiming my power and peace. It was about breaking free from the chains of the past and stepping into a future defined by my choices, not by her betrayals. The last messages she sent, pleading, angry, manipulative, were met with silence. I no longer engaged, no longer allowed her to dictate the rhythm of my life. The toxic friends who once bombarded me with vitriol had faded into irrelevance, their words powerless against the fortress I had built. In the quiet aftermath, I found something unexpected. Freedom. Freedom from pain, from lies, from the ghosts of a past that no longer held sway. Freedom to live on my own terms, unburdened by the weight of betrayal. And as I looked forward, I saw not a life defined by revenge, but by resilience, growth, and hope. The war was over, but the man who fought it was just beginning. The final echoes of the war faded slowly, like distant thunder retreating beyond the horizon. What remained was not the wreckage of lives torn apart, but the steady pulse of a man reclaimed, not by vengeance, but by a hard-won peace. After the years of betrayal, silence, and shattered illusions, I stood in the quiet aftermath, surveying a life rebuilt from ruins. The toxic ties had been severed, the lies exposed, and the scars transformed into marks of survival. The perfect life she once flaunted was revealed as a fragile facade, cracked and crumbling beneath the weight of truth. Her so-called allies had dispersed like smoke, their venomous words fading into obscurity. I was no longer the man haunted by ghosts of the past. I was a man who had endured, who had fought silently and emerged stronger. The battle had left its marks, not just on my skin but on my soul, but it had also forged a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. With the end of conflict came a new beginning. I reclaimed my time, my space, and my identity. The silence I once wielded as a weapon became a sanctuary, a place where I could heal without the noise of accusations or reminders of betrayal. I built new routines, surrounded myself with genuine connections, and pursued goals that belonged to me alone. The shadows of the past no longer dictated my steps. They were lessons etched in the fabric of my being, guiding me toward a future defined by my choices. Occasionally, the past whispered, in a message left unanswered, a memory stirred by a scent, a fleeting thought in the quiet moments. But those whispers no longer held power. They were reminders, not chains. Revenge, I realized, was not an act but a process, a transformation from pain to strength, from victim to survivor. The real victory lay not in tearing others down but in rising above, in reclaiming peace and forging a path forward. The final messages she sent, laden with regret and entitlement, were met with silence. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer belonged to that world. The toxic circle had shriveled and faded, their power broken. In the end, the story was not about her or the chaos she unleashed. It was about me, the man who refused to be broken, who reclaimed his life from the ashes of betrayal. And as I stepped into the future, I did so free from pain, free from lies, and free to live on my own terms. The war was over, but the life I rebuilt was just beginning.